Hey there. Tonight I want to begin with a quiet image. A scribe sits beside a reed lamp in the marsh country between two ancient rivers, and in front of him lies a clay tablet that says the world did not begin the way we think it did. Not with a slow crawl from rough huts to cities, not with patient little steps anyone could follow, but with a sudden arrival. Streets already measured, canals already cut, temples already rising, numbers already whispering across wet clay, as if someone had placed memory inside human hands before history had even learned to speak. And that is where our road begins, in the unsettling thought that the first great city builders may have been latecomers to a story that was already old. If that thought draws you in, press like. Subscribe if you feel this old, strange journey deserves a place in your evening. And settle in with me. Tonight we are not just visiting Sumer. We are listening for the echo of the 6 worlds it may have remembered. Now let the room grow dim. Let your jaws soften. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Breathe in slowly, and imagine the cool scent of river reeds after sunset. Breathe out, and picture warm clay drying in lamplight. Nothing is rushing here. We have a very long night, and a very old mystery. You are standing where the Tigris and Euphrates once fed a wide breathing plain of marshes and shining channels. The ground is damp beneath your feet. Reeds tremble in the dark water. The air carries the smell of mud, fish, smoke, and something faintly sweet from crushed river grass. Far away, a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The stars are low and steady overhead. And in this soft, uncertain country, around the 4th millennium before Christ, a civilization seems to rise, not like a child learning to stand, but like an adult stepping through a door that no one saw open. Honestly, I have always found that strange in a way that never quite leaves you. Most beginnings are messy, a little crooked, a little embarrassing. You expect a first attempt to wobble. You expect clumsy pots before elegant ones, rough huts before organized streets, crude guessing before mathematics with a spine. But Sumer arrives wearing finished ideas. It stands there in the half-light with planned cities, measured fields, formal temples, accounting systems, standardized weights, busy canals, layered government, and the kind of calm confidence that makes archaeologists lean closer to the soil, as if the ground itself might clear its throat and explain. Picture Uruk in the mind, not as a rumor, but as a living place. The streets carry footsteps before dawn. Workers move between storehouses. Priests pass through temple courts where the air smells of incense and damp brick. Water slides through canals with a low, steady sound that never quite stops. Barges drift. Clay jars knock softly against one another. Somewhere a potter turns a wheel. Somewhere an administrator presses a seal into wet clay and records a transaction with the matter-of-fact boredom of office work. That last detail always amuses me a little. Even at the edge of mystery, humanity still finds a way to invent paperwork. And yet the joke cannot quite soften the deeper puzzle. These were not little settlements growing awkwardly toward complexity. These were cities with districts, routes, drainage, craft specialization, religious hierarchy, and engineering confidence. Uruk Peru, Nippur. Their names still carry a hollow musical weight. Each one feels less like a village that got ambitious and more like a blueprint made visible. The architecture does not mumble. It speaks clearly. The water management does not improvise. It behaves as if guided by people who already understood how rivers can bless, betray, and be persuaded. Walk slowly through one of these imagined streets with me. The walls on either side are made of mud brick, warm brown by day, silver gray by moonlight. Your hand brushes one and feels the grain of straw pressed into the clay. Underfoot, the packed earth is firm from many feet. A narrow channel runs beside the lane, carrying water that catches the stars in broken fragments. Above, flat roofs and rising temple platforms create bands of darkness and pale light. There is order here. Not perfect order, because nothing human ever is, but enough to suggest memory, enough to suggest inheritance, enough to make a quiet person stop and wonder whether this city was built by people discovering civilization or by people remembering it. That is the heart of the first unease. The record we expect is not the record we get. In many places, history leaves a ladder behind. You can trace each rung. A simpler tool becomes a better one. A rough bowl becomes a refined vessel. A hut thickens into a house, then into a district, then into a town. But in the earliest Sumerian layers, the craftsmanship is often already remarkably assured. The systems are already coherent. The mathematics already seem to know where they are going. It is as if someone has opened a book to chapter 7, while insisting with a perfectly straight face that this is the beginning. The numbers only deepen the mood. The Sumerians use the base 60 system, and you can almost hear the modern world still echoing with it. 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees in a circle. A thought from the marshland still ticking quietly in every wristwatch. It is a little eerie. Really, the dead are often closer than the living admit. You glance at a clock, and some old Sumerian habit glances back. Their astronomical knowledge also arrives with unnerving poise. Priests and observers watch the heavens with patience that borders on devotion. The night sky above Mesopotamia is wide and mercilessly clear. Stars seem close enough to touch when the air cools after sunset. You can imagine a scholar lifting his face to that darkness, counting intervals, tracking rising points, memorizing the small, disciplined drift of celestial things. But when the tablets begin to speak, they do not sound like the first shy notes of skywatching. They sound like a tradition already in motion. Calendars, calculations, observations, patterns. The heavens are not only admired, they are measured. If you were standing here with me, I think the first thing you would feel is not triumph, but dislocation. The scene would look ancient, yes, but not primitive in the easy way people like to imagine. The canals are too purposeful. The records are too systematic. The temple platforms are too architecturally composed. Even the everyday objects suggest a society that has already gone through years of correction and refinement. Somewhere behind the visible city is an invisible apprenticeship, and that hidden training is precisely what has gone missing. Some scholars argue that the developmental stages simply have not been found. that erosion, rebuilding, floodplain shifts, and incomplete excavation have hidden the long, slow ladder we expect. That is fair, and it should be said softly and honestly. We cannot be sure of every silence in the ground. Missing evidence is not proof of impossible history, but the silence still matters. The silence still has shape. It still leans over the listener in the dark and asks why the opening scene already feels like the middle of the story. Imagine entering a temple workshop at dusk. The floor is cool. Reed baskets sit against the wall. Clay tablets dry on shelves like loaves. A scribe bends over one, stylus in hand, shoulders rounded, lamplight shaking on his knuckles. He is not writing legend with theatrical flourish. He is recording, counting, naming, preserving. That tone matters. The great mystery of Sumer is not only in what is written, but in how calmly it is written. The civilization does not present itself as miraculous. It presents itself as established. The voice of the tablet says, in effect, of course, cities are organized this way. Of course, offerings are tallied. Of course, channels run here. Of course, authority descends through these forms. It feels less like invention than procedure, and perhaps that is what unsettles the modern mind most. We are prepared for wonder. We are less prepared for confidence. A vanished world of giants and fire would almost be easier to hold than a filing system that appears too soon. But human beings do not live inside spectacles every day. They live in routines. So when a civilization appears with routines already matured, something in us grows quietly cold. Now, let the camera of the mind move outward again. Beyond the city rise the marshes. Beyond the marshes, the plain. Beyond the plain, the night. The moonlight lies in broken ribbons across water. Frogs pulse in the reeds. A breeze carries the smell of silt and distant cooking smoke, and wet earth so old it almost seems to have a memory of its own. Somewhere along these banks, people first pressed reed into clay, first stacked brick upon brick, first measured land by line and angle. Or at least that is the official story. But official stories are often like polished floors, lovely, tidy, and very good at hiding what lies beneath. Because beneath the poise of Sumer rests a question no one has quite put to sleep. If this was the first great civilization, why does it feel like an heir? You can sense the answer trying to form in the details. In the confidence of metallurgy, in the careful civic organization, in the precision of numbers that seem too mature for a first experiment, in the old temptation to say maybe these people were brilliant, and maybe brilliance sometimes flowers quickly. That too is possible. Human minds are extraordinary. Give them need, landscape, trade, pressure, ritual, and time, and they can rise astonishingly far. We should never steal that from the dead. Still, even if we grant all of that, the mood remains. Sumer feels less like a seedling than like regrowth after fire. And that image matters. Regrowth after fire. Something lost. Something remembered incompletely. Something rebuilt with hands that still carried a few inherited gestures. I think that is why the oldest records feel so haunting. They stand at the edge of history, looking backward. Not always clearly, not always faithfully, but backward all the same. Soon we will come to the king lists, to reigns so long they almost stop sounding absurd and begin sounding coded. We will come to floodlines dividing time itself into before and after. We will come to old sites older than Sumer, buried under earth and indifference. We will come to teacher figures, to strange names, to stories that speak in the tense of recollection rather than invention. But before we do, rest here a little longer beside the beginning that may not have been a beginning. Feel the night air over the river plain. Feel how the dampness settles on skin. Hear the slow tap of a stylus into clay. A tiny sound, almost nothing, yet enough to outlast empires. Look toward the first city and notice how little it resembles a first attempt. Its walls do not apologize. Its mathematics do not stammer. Its canals do not guess. Everything about it carries the posture of something that has already learned. Maybe that is the first real clue. Not a lost machine, not a broken monument under the sea, not a god descending in fire. Not yet. Only posture. Only the strange self-possession of a civilization standing in the dawn as if it has arrived late to an appointment made long before. And somewhere in that posture, if you listen carefully, is the first whisper of the larger claim. That Sumer may not have been the first light after darkness. It may have been the seventh candle lit from a flame no flood ever fully managed to drown. For now the lamp burns low. The reed beds murmur. The city breathes in brick and water and smoke. A scribe turns his tablet slightly and begins to write, not just of trade and grain and temples, but of kings. And with those kings, the numbers begin to stretch in ways that make the night feel older still. Before we leave this first threshold, notice one more small thing. The city is loud in daylight, but memory enters best at night. The water keeps moving when the markets close. Temple shadows lengthen. Dogs curl against warm walls. A woman carrying a jar pauses beside a canal and looks down into black water that reflects a broken moon. Somewhere, a child sleeps under a woven blanket while adults murmur about grain, taxes, weather, and the stubborn moods of rivers. Life goes on in ordinary human circles. That too matters. Because whatever Sumer inherited, it was not carried by abstractions alone. It was carried by tired hands, by voices around hearth smoke, by builders who woke before dawn and trusted measures they themselves may not have invented. You know that feeling when you enter an old house and somehow sense earlier lives still arranged inside it, even after the furniture has changed. That is what Sumer feels like to me. Not empty, never empty. Occupied by the afterimage of older knowledge. The rooms have been reset. The names have changed. But something in the proportions still belongs to a previous tenant. And once that possibility takes hold, it becomes very hard to stand in the first city and believe you are truly standing at the first door. So keep the image close now. The river breathing in darkness. The lamp. The stylus. The city too mature for its supposed youth. Because the next tablets will do something even stranger. They will not merely imply a lost depth behind history. They will count it. The tablet rests in 2 hands now, heavier than it looks. Clay always does that. It seems humble until you hold it. Then you feel the earth in it, the damp fields, the kiln fire, the patience of hands that shaped it, and the quiet arrogance of words meant to endure longer than flesh. In the wavering light, the signs pressed into its face begin to gather into a sequence. Names first, then cities, then reigns, and slowly, like a chill moving under a door, the impossible enters the room. The text says that after kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. It is such a calm sentence. That may be the most haunting part. No trumpet, no dramatic flourish, just the smooth administrative voice of a civilization placing authority where it believes authority began. Kingship descended from heaven. Then it was an Eridu. And after that come the rulers, lined up with the steadiness of bookkeeping. Alolim, Alalgar, Enmen Luana, Enmen Galana, Dumuzid, Ensipat Zidana, Enmen Durana, Ubara Tutu. Names worn smooth by repetition, and beside them rain links that make the modern mind recoil, then blink, then slowly lean in. 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years. The numbers do not arrive like drunken exaggeration. They arrive neatly, deliberately, precisely. That precision is what gives them their strange gravity. If this were merely boastful myth, we might expect vagueness, a king who ruled forever, a line that says for ages beyond counting. Human beings love blur when they wish to impress. But this text does the opposite. It counts. It measures. It assigns. It behaves as if there is nothing odd at all about handing one ruler a reign of 28,800 years, and the next another immense stretch of time, as though duration itself obeyed an order we have forgotten how to read. Picture the scribe copying these figures. His stylus moves with routine care. He is not gasping at the grandeur of the numbers. He is preserving them. That difference matters. You can almost hear the tiny click of reed against clay as he records what older tablets already said. Perhaps his teacher once recited the same list. Perhaps a damaged tablet lay beside him as source. Perhaps the line had already been copied for generations, each scribe trusting the chain more than himself. In that way, the impossible becomes stable. Repetition gives even the strangest thing a home. Now, let us sit with one of the oldest shocks in human literature. 8 kings ruled before the flood. Their combined reigns totaled 241,200 years. Then the flood swept over the land. After that, kingship descended again, and this time it was in Kish. There it is, a hing in time, before and after. A world divided not by dynasty alone, but by water. I have always thought that line feels less like mythology and more like trauma organized into record. The flood is not decorative. It is structural. It cuts history in half. Everything before it belongs to another texture of time. Everything after it feels diminished, narrowed, more familiar. Even the rains begin to shrink. That shrinking is one of the most beautiful and unsettling details in the whole king list tradition. Before the flood, the numbers tower. After the flood, they remain large for a while, larger than any normal human life, but they are moving downward. 1,560 years, 900 years, 600 years, 300. The pattern is not random. It contracts, like a world settling after injury, like memory compressing, like a long exhale after catastrophe. If you were standing here with me in the lamplit chamber, you might laugh softly at first. I probably would. Not because the text is silly, but because the human mind often laughs when it meets a scale it cannot comfortably absorb. 43,000 years. It sounds less like biography and more like weathering. A reign long enough for rivers to wander, languages to drift, and whole forests to grow old twice. Yet the list insists on personal sequence. This king, then this king, then this city, then the flood. Traditional scholarship, to be fair, has reasons for caution. Some scholars argue that these reigns are not literal lifespans, but dynastic periods compressed into single names, or symbolic ways of expressing prestige and sacred antiquity. Others suggest the numbers may encode priestly cycles, astronomical intervals, or literary forms intended to elevate certain cities. All of that deserves respect. We cannot be sure that the scribes intended modern readers to imagine one man sitting on a throne for 36 millennia and somehow remembering where he left his sandals. That would be a very demanding monarchy. Still, even when interpreted symbolically, the list remains strange. Because symbols have structure, and the structure here is mathematical. The antediluvian reigns are all multiples of 3,600. The Sumerian SAR. That word matters. The SAR is not an accidental convenience. It belongs to the deeper numerical world of Mesopotamia, to the base 60 imagination that already shaped their timekeeping, geometry, accounting, and astronomy. 28,800 years is 8 SAR. 36,000 is 10 SAR. 43,200 is 12 SAR. The numbers are built, not spilled. Someone arranged them according to a logic. Now, when numbers begin to repeat in measured multiples inside ancient sacred records, the atmosphere changes. We are no longer in the realm of casual fable. We are in the realm of encoded meaning. The list may still be mythic. It may still be ceremonial. But it is disciplined myth, mathematical myth, if you like. Myth wearing a surveyor's belt. And once again, that old Sumerian posture returns. Confidence, deliberate construction, a refusal to behave like nonsense. Imagine the temple schools where such figures may have been taught. Young scribes kneel on woven mats. The room smells of clay dust and warm oil from the lamps. On shelves around them rest tablets, old and new. Some sharp-edged, some chipped, some repaired. An instructor traces signs in the air, while students recite names and figures until rhythm fixes them in memory. Outside, canal water moves under moonlight. Inside, vast spans of time are reduced to careful sounds. 8 kings, 5 cities, 2 worlds divided by flood. Numbers as large as mountains, made small enough to fit inside the human mouth. You know that feeling when a song becomes more unnerving the more perfectly it repeats? The King list has that quality. Each entry marches in order. Kingship was in this city. This king ruled this long. Then the city fell. Kingship moved. Again and again. The pattern is soothing on the surface, yet the content beneath it keeps disturbing the calm. It is like watching someone embroider lightning onto linen with patient hands. The cities themselves are part of the mystery. Eridu first, then Bad Tibira, then Larak, Sipar, Shiruppak. These are not random dream places. They are rooted in the geography and sacred memory of southern Mesopotamia. To the Sumerian imagination, the world before the flood was not nowhere. It was located. It belonged to named centers. That too makes the list feel like compressed cultural remembrance. A civilization saying, we know where authority first lived. We know where the waters took it. We know the names, even if we no longer know how to live inside their scale. Eridu, especially, glows in these traditions like a damp star near the beginning of things. The oldest city, the first kingship, the sacred place of wisdom, water, and primal order, stand there in the mind now. Dawn not yet broken. Marsh birds stirring in the reeds. Mud brick walls cool to the touch. A temple mound rising from the plain with the kind of quiet certainty only ritual can build. You feel the river breath moving across the land. You smell silt and fish and wet clay. And someone, somewhere within that city, believes the throne there did not begin on earth. It descended. That phrase, descended from heaven, can be read in many ways. As theological poetry, as legitimizing ritual language, as coded memory of outside instruction, as metaphor for sacred law. The honest answer is that we do not know. But whatever it means, it establishes a pattern that will return again and again through ancient traditions. Authority is older than current humanity. Knowledge arrives from above. Civilization begins through transmission, not merely invention. In Sumer, even kingship has an ancestry that exceeds the visible city. Now notice what happens after the flood. The list does not end in ruin. It resumes. That matters almost more than the catastrophe itself. Water destroys, but memory continues. Kingship descends again. The sequence restarts in Kish. Something survived. If not intact, then enough. Enough to name. Enough to count. Enough to say what came before and what came after. This is one reason the King list feels so deeply sad to me beneath all its grandeur. It is a survivor document, even if stylized, even if ceremonial. It is shaped by the instinct to preserve continuity after breakage. And continuity, in the ancient world, often hides inside numbers. The precision of the numbers has led many researchers to wonder whether the list encodes cycles larger than ordinary rains. Astronomical periods, sacred intervals, dynastic totals, ritual eras. That possibility has a certain cool beauty to it. Imagine a culture so haunted by time that it writes its memory in units of heaven and kings at once. Imagine a scribe who knows that when he presses these figures into clay, he is preserving not literal birthdays and funerals, but cosmic bookkeeping, a ledger of worlds. Of course, there is danger in becoming too enchanted. The night likes theories. Lamplight makes patterns everywhere. We should be careful. Not every repeated number is a secret key. Not every ancient impossibility is evidence of lost superscience. Some things are sacred because they are symbolic, and symbolic because they help the mind stand near mystery without falling into it. That said, symbols are not empty. They are containers. And the king list was a container filled with something heavier than mere vanity. Perhaps that heaviness comes from the shrinking. I keep returning to it. Before the flood, impossible spans. After the flood, still long, but lesser. Then gradually lesser still. It feels almost biological, as if the world had once operated under one set of conditions, then another. Some hear in this the memory of longer-lived ancestors. Some hear the compression of dynasties. Some hear the mathematics of celestial eras disguised as royal succession. Some hear myth doing what myth does best, telling the truth, slant. And maybe, in the old way, more than one of those things could be true at once. Sit with the post-flood names for a moment. Kish rises. Then other cities take their turn. Rule moves. Human scale returns in slow degrees. The world we recognize begins to gather around the edges. Yet the shadow of the greater age remains. Like flood silt left on walls long after the water retreats. Like a family story too large to be disproved because no one living was there, and yet too persistent to be dismissed because everyone carries a fragment of it. If you were a child listening in a Sumerian household, perhaps you would first hear the great kings as bedtime names. Later, in the scribal school, you would learn their numbers. Later still, as an adult, you might hear the list recited during formal rites and understand that your people saw themselves not as pioneers, but as restorers. That is a subtle difference, but a profound one. Pioneers create. Restorers recover. The king list belongs to a civilization that may have believed the best things were older than itself. There is also something deeply human in the way the list localizes enormity. Floods, cosmic time, heavenly descent, and unimaginable rains are all anchored to cities, to administrations, to proper sequence. This king in that place, then another. It is the same instinct by which people label shelves during a disaster. If the world is too large, organize it. If the waters erase everything, record the order of what stood before. If memory begins to fray, count. And count they did. The signs on the tablet are small. That is worth remembering. Vast ages live inside marks no larger than a fingernail. A fingertip could cover one king's name. A thumb could hide 10,000 years. There is something almost tender in that disproportion. Human hands, soft and temporary, preserving spans of time too immense to feel. It is one of the reasons clay feels so moving as a medium. The stone declares, papyrus whispers, Clay remembers with weight. Now the lamp is burning lower. The room has grown warmer, but the mystery has grown colder. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, water moves in the dark. Perhaps a canal. Perhaps a marsh edge. Perhaps only wind through reeds making its own liquid sound. Inside, the king list sits between worlds. It tells us that before ordinary history, there was another order. Longer, stranger, mathematically shaped, and then the flood came and cut the thread almost through. Not entirely. Almost. That almost is where the story lives. Because once a civilization writes down that there were rulers before the flood, and once it writes those rulers in measured patterns, and once it resumes history afterward with visible seriousness, the listener is invited to ask the next question. If this is not only myth, then what exactly is being remembered? And if it is myth, why does it keep such rigorous company with number? I think that is why the king list has survived, not merely as a curiosity, but as a disturbance. It does not ask to be believed in the simple way. It asks to be sat with, to be read slowly, to be allowed its full uncanniness. Like a dream that refuses to dissolve after dawn, because some part of it was never dream at all. Soon we will move past the list and into the ground itself, into older settlements, buried stone, and the unsettling possibility that advanced cultures stood before the conventional opening of civilization. But carry these numbers with you when we go. 8 kings, 5 cities, 1200 years before the flood, shrinking rains after the waters, heaven above, Eridu below, the whole record balanced between cosmic scale and administrative neatness. That balance is the clue. The tablet does not shout. It counts. And in that calm counting, the old world begins to feel less like fantasy and more like an inheritance damaged by water, copied by survivors, and handed forward one careful sign at a time. Now let the tablet rest for a while. Its numbers have done their work. The lamp beside it burns with a low orange patience, and the room smells of warm clay, old rushes, and river damp. Outside, the canals move under the dark as though nothing has changed for thousands of years. Yet the mind has changed. Once you have heard of cities before the flood and rains measured in impossible units, the ordinary ground beneath history no longer feels ordinary. It begins to seem layered, like mud left by a receding river, each band carrying traces of another season, another life, another sky. So we leave the scribal chamber and go out into the earth itself. At first the ground says very little. It rarely offers answers quickly. Archaeology is a patient art, almost monastic in temperament. A brush moves. A trowel scrapes softly. Dust gathers in the creases of hands. Someone kneels in silence beneath a white sun and studies a stain in the soil no larger than a plate. There is nothing theatrical in this. No thunderbolt. No triumphant chorus. Only the long, almost humble labor of exposing one buried gesture at a time. A broken rim. A post hole. A wall line. A floor that once felt warm beneath someone's bare foot. And yet, when the older sites of Mesopotamia and the lands around it begin to emerge, They do not always behave like the rough childhood we have been taught to expect before civilization. They show skill too early, order too early, intention too early. Not everywhere, not in perfect continuity, but often enough to keep the old unease alive. Think first of the settlements that predate the classical Sumerian cities by long centuries. Places like Tel Es-Sawan, where the remains of an earlier world lie under layers of later forgetting. The air above such a site is dry and bright. Wind moves dust in faint spirals. A trench opens in the earth like a wound, and within it appear walls, pottery, traces of planning. Not a random cluster of shelters thrown together in panic, but something more composed. Something lived in, repeated, improved. The houses have proportions. The craft has memory in it. It is not yet Uruk in full splendor. No, but neither is it a blind first step. You crouch in the mind beside an excavated wall. The mud brick is crumbling a little at the edge, where it meets the air again after ages below. Its color shifts between brown and pale gold depending on the angle of the light. Nearby lies a potsherd with painted geometry still clinging to it, stubborn as pride. A line, a pattern, a hand from 6,000 years ago, insisting that utility alone was not enough. People decorate when they expect continuity. That thought has always stayed with me. Ornament belongs to those who believe tomorrow will still matter. At Tel Es-Sawan and other early sites, there are hints of irrigation, storage, organized craft, and settled intention. These communities knew how to manage water and shape habit around it. They understood that rivers are both gift and threat, and that survival near them requires discipline. That is not glamorous knowledge. It is better. It is civilization's real spine. Now widen the horizon even more. Move north and west in the imagination to Göbekli Tepe, a place that rises in the mind like a whispered dare. You stand on a hill in southeastern Anatolia. The light there is different, hard and clean. Stones break out of the earth in circular arrangements. Pillars rise. Relief carvings stare back from the deep past. Animals emerging from the surface with unnerving confidence. Foxes, birds, snakes, forms cut into stone with a steadiness that does not match the old story of crude hunter bands barely finding enough to eat. Honestly, if you were standing there with me at dawn, with the wind moving over that hill and the pillars casting long, quiet shadows, I think the strangest feeling would not be awe exactly. It would be dislocation. The site is too composed, too symbolic, too planned. The stones suggest labor organization, ritual coherence, technical skill, and above all, time invested with purpose. People did not drag and shape such masses because they were bored on a Tuesday. And then there is the burial of the site, one of the most haunting details of all. Not simply abandonment, but deliberate covering. Layer after layer, as though the builders or their descendants chose to tuck the place into the earth rather than let it weather away. That choice has the flavor of memory protection. You cover what you intend to preserve, what you want, hidden from erosion or enemies or the careless centuries ahead. A buried monument is a message folded inward. Some scholars see in Göbekli Tepe the flowering of ritual complexity before urban life, a reminder that human communities can organize grand symbolic labor long before cities. That is a serious and thoughtful interpretation. It deserves to be heard. But even within that reading, the sight remains startling. It presses sophistication further back. It loosens the neat ladder. It suggests that the soil under civilization is busier than we once imagined. Now let the mind drift back towards Sumer with this added weight. If older places already carried planning, carving, and communal effort, then perhaps Sumer did not spring from nothing. Perhaps it inherited more than the conventional story once allowed. Not a magical inheritance, necessarily. Not a sudden gift dropped from the clouds, but a deeper substratum of remembered techniques, sacred habits, and half-surviving systems. This is how the earth begins to answer the king list. Quietly, indirectly. It does not say yes. Your antediluvian kings are verified. The ground is never so obliging. But it does say this: the world before classical history was not empty. It held communities capable of surprising discipline and expression. It held builders. It held organizers. It held minds that could see beyond a single season. Picture a worker at one of these early settlements, kneeling by wet clay. His hands are lined with silt. Straw scratches his wrists. He presses a wall patch smooth, while someone nearby twists reeds into cord. Children move in the background, chasing one another between storage jars. Smoke rises from a fire whose smell settles into hair and cloth. This is not fantasy. This is the ordinary nobility of old settled life. And it matters because civilizations are not only born in palaces, they begin in repeated motions. In walls repaired before rain, in channels cleared before planting, in grain measured, in knowledge passed from one tired body to another. The more one listens, the less history feels like a straight road and the more it resembles a marsh path, half hidden, doubling back, vanishing under water, then reappearing where you least expected it. Conventional timelines prefer stairs. The ancient earth prefers reeds and mist. Now into that mist comes another set of figures, perhaps the most famous and most difficult of all, the Anunnaki. The name moves through Sumerian tablets like a low current. Those who from heaven to earth came. That is one common paraphrase offered in modern retellings. Though the exact linguistic roads are more complicated, and scholars debate the nuances, still, what matters for our quiet walk tonight is how these beings are described within the old textual world. They are not always written as distant abstractions. Often, they appear with roles, duties, jurisdictions, relationships, rivalries, expertise. They organize, they instruct, they establish. They are woven into the machinery of civilization itself. In some texts, they are divine powers in the fullest mythic sense, inseparable from sacred imagination and cosmic order. In others, the tone feels unexpectedly administrative, as if the scribes are recording a hierarchy already familiar to them. Enki, associated with wisdom, water, craft, and hidden understanding. Enlil with air, to command, order, the storm, kingship, Anu above, remote and sovereign. Around them, a whole council structure, a world of ranked authority and functional domains. What is so intriguing is not merely that the Sumerians had gods. Every ancient civilization had gods. It is that their gods sometimes behave less like misty personifications and more like remembered founders with portfolios. Imagine entering a temple archive in Eridu or Nippur. The shelves are lined with tablets. The room is cool compared to the heat outside. Dust hangs in the narrow beam from a high opening. A priest or scribe reads aloud from a text describing how wisdom, irrigation, rulership, and sacred law came into the human world. The language does not always sound like metaphor dressed for ceremony. Sometimes it sounds closer to institutional memory. This deity taught this. That deity established that. The city was founded. The rights were given. The measures were fixed. I have always found that tone more eerie than any monster story. A dragon is easy to place in the category of myth. An administrator of civilization is harder. An instructor, a planner, a bringer of systems. That kind of figure does not vanish so neatly into symbol. Some modern readers take the Anunnaki in a literalist direction, imagining advanced visitors, lost teachers, technological overseers. Others reject that entirely and see only theology, political symbolism, and the poetic language of sacred kingship. Between those two poles lies a quieter possibility, that the texts preserve layered memory, mythologized, yes, elevated, certainly, but still rooted in something old enough to blur the line between founder, ruler, ancestor, and God. You know that feeling when family stories become larger with each generation, yet still hold a small hard kernel no embellishment can quite erase. The Anunnaki may live in that territory. A memory wrapped in reverence until the wrapping and the thing beneath it can no longer be separated. And then there are the so-called arts of civilization. Agriculture, irrigation, writing, measurement, governance, metallurgy, temple, order. The old accounts repeatedly frame these not as random inventions bubbling up in isolation, but as teachings, transmissions, allocations of knowledge. Civilization is handed down, shared, bestowed, released into human care. Picture the first cut canal under a copper sunset. Men standing in mud to their calves. Reed baskets passing earth from hand to hand. Water beginning to move where there had been only stagnant wetness before. The smell of river plants crushed underfoot. Frogs startled into silence. Somewhere on the bank, an elder watches the line and angle, knowing where the channel must bend and where it must not. Is he simply an experienced local engineer? Is he a priest following inherited sacred measurements? Is he, in some later retelling, remembered as one of the wise beings who taught humanity to command the waters? Perhaps all three descriptions belong to the same man across different centuries of memory. This is the point where the narrative grows beautifully uncertain. And uncertainty, handled gently, is not a weakness. It is often the most honest music history can offer. So let us keep both eyes open. One eye on the texts and their sacred drama. One eye on the trenches and their stubborn evidence. Older sites show us that sophistication reaches backward further than once assumed. Sumer shows us a civilization arriving with alarming confidence. The King list hints at remembered ages before catastrophe. The Anunnaki traditions frame knowledge as inherited from beings already wise. None of this proves a lost global super-civilization in the simple, sensational sense. But neither does it allow the old, easy tale of steady, uncomplicated ascent to remain untroubled. The night outside the archive has grown deeper now. Water laps against reeds with a slow, small sound. A lamp gutters. Somewhere in the city, a dog turns twice and settles into sleep. In the temple room, the tablet describing the old teachers is returned to its place. Clay touches clay with a soft, dry click. No one in that moment imagines internet debates or television graphics or paperback covers full of cosmic fireworks. They are simply preserving what they believe is true. That the roots of order were older than themselves. That wisdom entered the world from a higher source, whether heavenly, ancestral, or both. That cities are not only built, they are transmitted, and perhaps transmitted through disaster, because the flood remains waiting at the center of the story like a dark basin. The older world glimmers around it in fragments. Deep sites, buried monuments, teacher gods, impossible rains, then the waters, then a diminished but remembering humanity. You can almost see the pattern forming in the half-light. Not a neat answer, never a neat answer, but a rhythm. Emergence, height, Rhine, preservation, return. Before we leave this part of the night, notice one more image. A child in an early settlement presses a hand into wet plaster and leaves the mark there by accident or mischief. The wall dries. The hand remains. Centuries pass. The roof falls. The city dissolves. Floodplain mud shifts over everything. Then one day a trench opens, and that small hand appears again in sunlight. That, to me, is the feeling of these older sites. Not proof that every legend is literal, but proof that forgotten worlds once touched the same earth we do. Their touch remains. And when enough such touches gather together, the old Sumerian whisper grows harder to dismiss. Maybe we are not looking at the dawn of civilization. Maybe we are looking at dawn after something else had already set. And if that is true, then the stories of the teacher beings become less like decorative mythology and more like the surviving echo of a bridge between worlds, one before the waters and one after them. The next step will carry us into the flood itself, into the strange consistency of deluge memory across cultures, and into the possibility that catastrophe, not ignorance, is the missing chapter between the buried past and the first cities we think we know. Listen for a moment before the water arrives. That may sound odd, but it matters. Every flood story worth hearing begins in a world that still thinks tomorrow will resemble today. A pot is set near the hearth. Grain is measured. A child falls asleep to the usual animal sounds outside. Somewhere, a woman folds cloth. Somewhere, a priest studies a star. Somewhere, a boat rope taps against wood in a canal. Ordinary life is the first thing all catastrophe takes. And because of that, Ordinary life is the first thing memory tries to save. In Mesopotamia, the Great Flood comes down to us through several linked traditions: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, each shaping the old current a little differently, yet never enough to hide the central wound. There was a time before the waters. There was warning. There was construction. There was survival in a vessel carefully made. Then there was a world after, smaller and sadder, and filled with the difficult work of beginning again. The figure changes name depending on the text. Ziusudra, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim. But the role remains recognizable. The listener, the builder, the survivor, the one who carries continuity through water. Picture him not as a heroic statue, but as a tired man hearing something he wishes he had misunderstood. It is night. Reed walls shift slightly in the breeze. Oil light trembles. The smell of bitumen, river mud, and cooling ashes hangs in the room. Somewhere outside, animals stir without settling. That detail appears in many flood traditions, and I have always found it unsettling. Before people understand, the animals often do. Birds rise strangely. Herds grow restless. Dogs whine toward the dark. The world seems to tilt a little before the first visible break. The warning in the Mesopotamian versions is practical in a way I deeply admire. The vessel is not magic. It is built. Measurements are given. Materials are named. Pitch is used for sealing. Compartments are arranged. Stores are gathered. Life is preserved through carpentry, planning, and obedience to instructions. The old texts do not merely say, "A miracle happened." They say, "Here is how the structure was made. Here is how survival was organized." There is something profoundly human in that. Even in divine warning, the hands must still work. You can almost hear the sound of construction, axes biting wood, reeds being bundled, bitumen heated until the smell turns thick and tar like in the air. Men wiping sweat with forearms darkened by dust. Water slapping softly nearby as the hull begins to take form. Voices lower than usual. No one laughing much. Because everyone involved senses the same impossible thing. This is either salvation or the labor of fools. That tension sits inside every great preparation. Build or be ridiculous. Build or be dead. The flood narratives preserve dimensions and procedures with a steadiness that still surprises modern readers. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim describes the vessel with matter-of-fact care, as though he is remembering a difficult engineering task rather than recounting a dream. The walls were raised. The decks were arranged. The hull was sealed. Goods, kin, craftsmen, and living creatures were brought aboard. There is order in the loading. The language behaves like memory. Traditional scholarship often treats such detail as literary realism, the author giving myth the texture of practical life. That may well be true in part. Ancient writers were perfectly capable of skilled storytelling. But even then, the effect remains. The flood is not imagined as vague chaos. It is rendered as event, measured, timed, managed as far as management remains possible. now widen outward beyond Mesopotamia. This is where the rune grows very still. Because the flood does not stay local, it appears again and again across cultures, not in one identical script, of course, but with such persistent shared elements that the mind begins to move from curiosity into a quieter form of awe. In the Americas, in Australia, in Africa, in the Pacific, in South Asia, in old Europe, waters rise. A warning is given. A chosen few survive. Animals are saved, or at least named. Mountains matter. Boats matter. The old world disappears. The new one begins in grief. The Hopi speak of a destruction by water linked with celestial signs and survival through refuge prepared in advance. The Cherokee preserve accounts of great waters and sealed vessels. The Maasai tell of a righteous man warned before inundation. In Polynesian traditions, waters cover nearly all, and only heights remain. Australian Aboriginal accounts speak with that dreamlike precision oral cultures sometimes carry better than written ones. Temporal markers, rising levels, waiting, retreat. The details vary in texture because every people fits memory into its own landscape. Yet the rhythm persists. Picture coastlines at the end of the last ice age. Sea levels were far lower. Vast continental shelves now drowned under modern oceans were then dry land. River valleys, plains, habitable edges rich in life. People would naturally have lived there, fished there, planted there, buried their dead there, told stories there. Then the ice melts, waters rise, not always in one single smooth bathtub motion, but through pulses, surges, storms, collapsing ice dams, regional inundations, and perhaps in places terrifying suddenness. Entire inhabited landscapes vanish, and with them whatever settlements, shrines, roads, and cemeteries stood there. If your grandparents remembered fields where your children know only sea, how would you tell that story? Probably not as sea level rise curve data. Probably as a world taken by water. Then come the drowned places themselves. Off the coast of India, the remains linked with ancient Dwarka. Stone features below modern sea level. Walls, blocks, possible harbor structures, artifacts suggesting old occupation in places now drowned. Marine archaeology is difficult, messy, often frustrating, and dating underwater contexts can be treacherous. We should say that clearly, but even with caution, the picture is provocative. Coastal complexity, older than many comfortable narratives once allowed. Picture a drowned city at first light, seen from beneath the water. Columns dim green with growth. Fish turning where children once ran. Sand moving through doorways. A stone threshold touched by no hand for 8,000 years. There is nothing loud in such a place. Only the long hush of things removed from sunlight. And yet the hush itself is evidence. People lived where the sea now sleeps. This matters for Sumer more than it first seems. The Persian Gulf, too, was once a different world. A broad, exposed basin fed by rivers, fertile and traversable during lower sea levels. Some have imagined it as a cradle landscape for early settled life, later drowned as waters rose. We cannot map every lost community there, but the possibility alone deepens the old Mesopotamian memories. When people in that region told of flood and vanished worlds, they may not have been inventing against an empty backdrop. They may have been carrying blurred ancestral memory of real geography erased by water. And now, gently, the old Sumerian claim begins to gather company. Before the flood, there were cities. Before the flood, kingship was elsewhere. Before the flood, the world held another order. Afterward, survivors resumed with what they could keep. I have always thought the saddest and most beautiful part of this pattern is not the destruction. It is the preservation. Someone always tries to carry something through. Seeds, animals, names, measures, ritual lines, star knowledge, building techniques, stories. The vessel in flood narratives is not only a boat. It is a moving archive. Imagine Utnapishtim, or whatever historical core once fed that figure, standing inside the sealed vessel while rain hammers above and the hull groans under the pressure of dark water. The air inside smells of wet wood, pitch, animals, fear. Birds beat their wings against confinement. Someone is praying in a whisper that no one can quite hear over the storm. Somewhere a child is crying herself into exhausted silence. Somewhere a jar has broken. Somewhere a man who never doubted the warning until this exact moment now realizes the world outside is truly gone. This is not triumph. It is continuity wrapped in terror. The flood lasts. That matters too. Time stretches strangely in enclosed survival. Day and night blur. The body forgets distance. Memory becomes sound. Water against wood. Animals shifting. Human breath. The endless labor of waiting. Then, eventually the tests begin. A bird sent out. Another. The search for dry land. The moment of grounding. The first step out into a world washed raw. Many cultures preserve that detail of release. The bird, the mountain, the uncertain landing. It is one of the loveliest images in all catastrophe memory. After chaos, a small creature carries the first news. Not a king, not a priest, a bird. Now the world after the flood is not the same world. That too is universal. Lifespans shrink. Cities must be refounded. Sacred order must be reset. Humanity is chastened, reduced, dispersed, or made newly dependent on law. In the Sumerian king list, the numerical contraction itself almost dramatizes the post-flood diminishment. History comes back smaller. The survivors stand under a sky that feels farther away. You can see why later traditions would remember teacher beings, lawgivers, culture bringers, and heavenly descended kings. A broken civilization often imagines restoration coming from above or from the surviving few who still remember. Perhaps those memories are mythical elaborations. Perhaps they are also social truth. After catastrophe, the person who remembers how to build a channel or align a temple or record a harvest may well feel like a gift from heaven. There is a temptation in all this to rush toward certainty, to say the flood was this exact event. The antediluvian cities were those exact drowned ruins. The myths are literal records, with names slightly changed. Night stories love that sort of closure. Real history is kinder and harder. It leaves the edges soft. But softness is not emptiness. 1,000 traditions need not be identical to reveal a common ancestral fear. Geological upheaval need not match every line in epic poetry to give those epics weight. The point is not that every piece locks with satisfying modern neatness. The point is that memory, earth, water, and text keep drifting toward one another in the dark. By now, the room smells different, not only of clay and oil, but of wet cedar in the imagination, of bitumen, of the sharp, cold scent that comes after long rain. The king list is still nearby. The earlier sites are still half visible through dust. The Anunnaki stories hover like torchlight at the edge of the archive. And through them all moves water, the great divider. Before the flood, after the flood, it is one of the oldest sentences humanity ever learned to live inside. Soon we will turn from the waters and look upward, toward the stars and the long celestial cycles ancient cultures tracked with unnerving patience. Because if flood memory divides time horizontally across the earth, astronomical memory stretches it vertically into the heavens. And somewhere between those two, drowned land below and measured sky above, the notion of repeated civilizations begins to gather real force. But for now, stay with the survivors a moment longer. They are standing on wet ground that was not supposed to be there. Their clothes smell of vessel wood and animal fear. Their eyes are red with exhaustion. Around them, the world is stripped, bright, silent. The old cities are gone, or far away, or now existing only in the form of names and numbers, one day to be pressed into clay. Yet one thing remains. They remember enough to begin again. That may be the single most human fact in all these stories. Not that disaster comes. Disaster always comes. But that some part of knowledge insists on floating. And if enough knowledge floated through enough darkness, then perhaps Sumer was not the first civilization after all. Perhaps it was only the first one history still remembers by name. Now lift your eyes from the drowned earth and let them travel upward. The flood stories leave us standing on wet ground, shivering a little, listening for birds and measuring what remains. Yet the people who rebuilt after catastrophe did not look only at mud, seed, timber, and the hard arithmetic of hunger. They also looked into the sky. That may be the most persistent habit of civilization. After grief, humans count the heavens. We search for order where the stars seem to move without caring about us. And in doing so, we quietly discover that they do care, or at least that their motions shape the rhythm of our days in ways too large to ignore. For the Sumerians, the sky was not decoration. It was administration. It was calendar, warning, theology, memory, and law written in light. Their astronomer priests stood on high places and watched points of fire rise and sink over the reed beds and brick roofs. They tracked the moon with a devotion almost tender in its patience. They marked Venus, wandering and bright, and the slower, solemn movement of the planets. They divided circles and hours with that base 60 system which still survives in our clocks. A little ghost from old Mesopotamia ticking in every modern room. If you were standing beside one of those observers at the edge of night, you would hear very little at first. Perhaps water moving through a canal. Perhaps a distant animal. Perhaps the low scrape of a stylus being adjusted in the hand of a scribe waiting to record. The air would be cool on the face and carry a faint smell of damp clay. Above, the sky would widen into an almost frightening clarity. Then the observer would begin naming things. Not just stars, but intervals, returns, deviations, a small delay in the rising of a known light, a pattern repeating over years, a relation between one cycle and another. This is where the old question becomes especially unsettling. How long must one watch to know such things? Some celestial patterns reveal themselves in months, some in years. But others, the really deep ones, ask for generations. One human life is not enough. A father begins the record. A daughter continues it. A grandson refines it. A temple school preserves it. And only then does the sky admit one of its slower secrets. That is why the ancient awareness of precession has such a haunting quality. The precession of the equinoxes, that long wobble of the earth that shifts the background stars behind seasonal points over immense stretches of time, is not the kind of thing a casual shepherd notices between one spring and the next. It asks for institutional memory. It asks for continuity so disciplined that it almost becomes sacred. The great year, nearly 26,000 years in length, sits behind so many old systems like a buried wheel. 12 ages, each around 2,160 years. The equinoctial point, slowly walking backward through the zodiac. Ancient cultures did not all describe this in identical language, and scholars debate the extent of explicit knowledge in different regions and periods. That caution matters, but so does the recurring pattern. Again and again, old traditions speak as though human history unfolds, not as a single line, but as a series of celestial seasons. Ages change. Powers rise and fade. Consciousness itself seems to thicken or dim under different skies. The Sumerians worked with numbers that feel almost oversized until one learns to sit with them. Sacred periods, large units, repeating multiples. Their use of the number 432,000 has always drawn attention, especially when it appears in relation to antediluvian kingship and immense time spans. The same number, or its close relatives, echo in later traditions, above all in Hindu cosmology. There, the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, lasts 432,000 years. Larger cycles multiply outward from that. The recurrence is one of those details that makes the mind fall quiet. Coincidence is possible. Shared deep inheritance is also possible. Ancient number mysticism has a habit of walking beside astronomy until the two look almost married. Picture a priest in a dim chamber at dawn, tracing a wedge sign into wet clay while murmuring a number too large for any harvest account. Nearby, a younger student repeats the value softly, committing it to memory before the tablet dries. Outside, workers are already hauling baskets. Animals are already calling for feed, and someone is already complaining about a cracked jar. Life is ordinary. Yet inside this room, time is being measured on a scale so large it makes the walls feel temporary. From Mesopotamia, the thought travels. Egypt receives it in stone. India stretches it into cosmic yugas. Later, Greece philosophizes it. Mesoamerica encodes it in calendars that turn like interlocking teeth. The feeling remains the same, that we are not merely moving forward, but moving through a pattern. The Great Pyramid at Giza enters the story here, like a monument that never quite finishes being strange. Set aside the easy sensationalism for a moment, and simply stand near it in the imagination. The limestone glows softly under late sun. The blocks breathe out heat gathered all day. Wind moves fine dust over the plateau. No matter how many diagrams one has seen, the actual mass of it would hush the mind. It is too exact, too composed, too indifferent to your approval. The relationships embedded in its measures have fascinated generations because they suggest not only labor and ambition, but a numerical mind at work. Ratios tied to the earth, to geometry, to sky. Alignments that appear to map celestial order into terrestrial permanence. Some researchers argue that the internal shafts and stellar relationships point to epochs older than the standard chronology of dynastic construction. The proposal is debated, as it should be. But the debate itself exists because the monument carries a strange, calm precision that invites such questions. One does not look at those aligned passages and think of improvisation. One thinks of a culture willing to fix memory into stone against the erasing hand of time. Now, move to Stonehenge, where the wind is colder and the light feels thinner. Stand in the grass with the stones rising around you, each one darkened by weather, each one carrying the patient silence of things that outlast explanation. The monument changed over many phases. Yes, and archaeologists have traced those changes carefully. Yet even within that accepted complexity, there remains an unmistakable astronomical devotion. Solstice lines, orientations, revisions, a place adjusted over generations to keep speaking correctly to the sky. That persistence matters. It means people returned not just to worship, but to recalibrate, to preserve correspondence between earth ritual and celestial motion. I have always found that more moving than the fantasy of instant lost genius. A site tended across centuries by people who believed the heavens were worth keeping in conversation with. There is something deeply human in that. Also something slightly eerie. The stones are not random memorials. They are instruments disguised as monuments, or monuments disguised as instruments, which may be the same thing in the end. Then farther east in imagination, Angkor Wat. There the world grows humid, fragrant, green, and immense. Water reflects towers shaped like a sacred mountain. Causeways extend with ceremonial certainty. Bas reliefs ripple with myth, battle, gods, demons, oceans churned for nectar. And beneath the magnificence, there is measurement. Distances that echo cosmological numbers. Orientations that hold the sun and equinox in deliberate dialogue. The temple is not only a place of devotion. It is a map of order. A machine of symbolism built large enough to walk through. When architecture begins to think astronomically, one feels the old pattern tightening. Human beings do not merely shelter. We encode. We make stone remember what flesh cannot. Mesoamerica takes that instinct and sharpens it into calendars so intricate they feel alive. The Maya tracked multiple concurrent cycles with a mathematical elegance that still deserves quiet respect. Sacred counts, solar counts, Venus cycle, eclipse table, long count epochs, reaching across spans that make ordinary dynastic lists seem like brief weather reports. To sit with a Mayan codex is to feel the page almost humming with time. These were not people drifting vaguely through ritual. They were mathematicians of recurrence. Their world, too, was divided into ages, creations, destructions, renewals. Worlds ended. Worlds began again. The current one had a starting point. It would have an ending point. Time was not a road. It was a chamber of gears. The same thought turns up in India, with even more explicit cosmic grandeur. Satya, Treta, Dvapara, Kali. The yugas descend through moral and spiritual density like evening deepening across a field. The lengths are immense, the proportions precise. 4, 3, 2, 1. Harmonic decline. Human consciousness contracts. Lifespan changes. Dharma weakens. Yet the Dark Age is not final. It is part of a wheel that turns toward renewal. If you have ever listened to rain at night and felt that it was both ending something and feeding something else, you already understand the emotional truth of such cosmology. The old axiom, as above, so below, belongs here, not as a slogan but as a worldview. Ancient peoples watched sky and earth mirror one another. Changes above corresponded to changes below. A comet, conjunction, eclipse, or unusual star might accompany political upheaval, famine, flood, or dynastic change. To modern minds, this sounds like astrology, and sometimes it was. Yet it was also a disciplined attempt to correlate recurring celestial patterns with human history. The Mesopotamian omen texts are full of such observations, not mere superstition tossed into the dark, but sustained correlation work, the ancient equivalent of keeping a very long notebook and hoping the universe eventually explains itself. In Egypt, this became tied to kingship and the soul. In China, it took the form of the mandate of heaven, where celestial irregularities could signal the moral exhaustion of a dynasty. In Greece, especially among Pythagoreans and Orphics, number itself became almost holy, a bridge between music, planet, proportion, and soul. The music of the spheres may sound quaint now, but beneath it lies a serious intuition that motion and ratio connect beauty to structure in ways the human mind can feel before it can fully prove. Now return to our central unease. If so many cultures preserve great cycles, previous worlds, age shifts, astronomical monuments, and cosmic timing, what are we looking at? Independent symbolic development, a common human response to the visible sky, or the scattered inheritance of observations once coordinated by older civilizational centers now broken and dispersed. You do not have to choose too quickly. Night is kinder when it allows layered answers. Still, the accumulation becomes difficult to ignore. Sumer tracks immense spans and sacred numbers. Egypt raises stone against stellar time. India stretches ages across cosmic arithmetic. Mesoamerica builds calendars that think in worlds. Across them all, there is the quiet suggestion that humanity rises and falls in rhythm with larger celestial patterns. And if that is so, then civilization itself may not be a unique spark, but a recurring phase. A season of concentration between catastrophes. Picture an ancient observatory now lost beneath water or sand. The walls once held markings of stars no one living now remembers by their old names. A teacher once stood there with students and showed them how the sky slowly changed in ways too slow for one life, but not too slow for a lineage of watchers. They learned that worlds have ages, that climates shift, that coastlines move, that dynasties mistake themselves for permanence. They learn to build in stone not because stone is immortal, but because memory needs every advantage it can get. Outside, perhaps, ordinary people argued about grain and marriages and taxes and whether the fish were running late that season. Inside, someone marked a long cycle on a wall and whispered that another turning would come. The lamp in our imagined archive burns lower now. Its smoke rises in a narrow, wavering line. On the shelf, the old king list waits beside the flood traditions and the teacher stories. Beyond them lies a new category of unease, the things made by hands. Not only numbers, not only temples, but mechanisms and artifacts and worked stone that appear too precise, too early, too difficult. The sky has prepared us for them. Once you believe old civilizations thought longer than we once admitted, it becomes easier to ask whether they also built with greater sophistication than our textbooks once allowed. That is where we go next. From stellar cycles to engineered marvels. From great years to gears. From cosmic arithmetic to bronze teeth and impossible stone. And somewhere in that shift, the feeling deepens. We may not simply be the heirs of ancient wisdom. We may be the late rememberers of a science that has already died more than once. By the time the mind has traveled through drowned cities, antediluvian kings, celestial cycles, and temples aligned to patient stars, it is almost ready for the objects. Almost, but not quite. Because objects are harder to soften than stories. A myth can be filed away as symbol if it unsettles you. A mechanism with gears cannot be dismissed so gracefully. A stone cut too well to fit the era assigned to it does not politely step back into metaphor. It remains there under your hand, cool and exact, asking the rude question, who knew how to do this? Let us begin in the sea. A storm long ago drove a ship to the bottom near the Greek island of Antediluvian. Centuries later, divers found bronze fragments among the wreck, green with age, and easily mistaken at first for little more than corroded debris. Yet inside those fragments lived a machine. Not a toy, not a decorative curiosity. A calculating device, gear within gear, able to model celestial cycles with a sophistication that still makes modern readers blink and then lean closer. The Antikythera mechanism is one of those discoveries that changes not only what we know, but how startled we are willing to be. Imagine a conservator in a quiet room turning one fragment gently under bright light. The bronze is pitted. Salt has eaten at it. Crust and corrosion hide more than they reveal. Then imaging technology begins to peel the darkness back. Tooth counts, axles, inscriptions, differential motion, eclipse cycles, planetary periods. What had rested silent for 2,000 years opens like a metal flower. And suddenly, the ancient world is no longer merely philosophical. It is mechanical in a highly articulate way. The device often gets described as an ancient computer, which is accurate enough to convey the shock. Yet I think of it more tenderly than that. It is a pocket cosmos in bronze, a handheld negotiation with time. Someone built this so the sky could be modeled, predicted, carried. Someone knew how to cut gears with a precision most cultures would not achieve again for many centuries. Once you know it existed, the old, comfortable image of ancient technology becomes more difficult to keep intact. Now there are responsible cautions to make. The mechanism comes from the Hellenistic world, much later than early Sumer, and it does not by itself prove a hidden antediluvian machine age. Of course not. But that is not the point. The point is that human history contains islands of sophistication that often appear more abruptly than linear progress narratives would prefer. The mechanism proves at minimum that complex technical knowledge can flourish, disappear, and leave only fragments. One fragment is enough to change the emotional climate of the whole past. The same unease follows other artifacts. In Mesopotamia, the so-called Baghdad batteries, clay vessels with copper cylinders and iron rods, continue to provoke debate. Were they galvanic cells? Ritual containers? Storage devices repurposed by imagination? Scholars disagree. That disagreement is honest and necessary. Yet the basic design remains suggestive. When filled with an acidic liquid, such arrangements can produce a measurable voltage. One jar proves little. Multiple similar finds invite slower consideration. Picture a workshop in old Iraq. The air smells of bitumen, copper dust, heated clay. A craft worker fits metal into a vessel with the absorbed concentration of someone doing a familiar task. Perhaps he is preparing an electrical cell for plating. Perhaps something less astonishing. We do not know. But the object sits there in the half-light, refusing to become entirely ordinary again. Then there is the plated metal itself. Certain ancient surfaces appear to show a uniformity that has made some researchers wonder whether electrochemical methods were known in some form. Mainstream explanations often prefer chemical treatments or skilled mechanical application, and many times they may be right. Still, what lingers is the broader realization that ancient craft traditions were often far more experimental, far more chemically alert than the old phrase primitive ever deserved. And then, the stones. The stones are the worst for the tidy mind. Go first to Pumapunku in the high, thin air of Bolivia, where the sky seems to sit close enough to touch and the wind moves over the plateau with a kind of austere indifference. There lie blocks of andesite and sandstone, worked into forms so crisp, so geometric, so insistently exact that even photographs can feel slightly unreal. Grooves, right angles, H-shaped cuts, interlocking surfaces, flatness across spans where roughness would have been easier, drill marks, precision that appears less like brute force and more like a conversation with measurement. Stand near one of those blocks and run your mind along the edge. It is cold. The surface holds the memory of tools, How were they used? With what abrasives? With what templates? With what patience? Conventional archaeology offers answers based on hammerstone, abrasion, labor, organization, and long cumulative skill. Those answers should not be caricatured. Human beings can do astonishing things with persistence, stone, and time. Yet even granting that, Pumapunku keeps its peculiar dignity. It does not want to be waved away. It wants to be studied until our vocabulary becomes worthy of it. The same sensation returns at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Massive blocks, fitted together in irregular polygonal forms so tightly that the joints seem more grown than built. Earthquake resistant by instinct or engineering genius, perhaps both. Each stone shaped not into a generic brick, but into a response to every neighboring face. It is masonry as choreography. Move one stone and the whole dance changes. I have always found these walls oddly soothing, not because they are easily explained, but because they reveal a forgotten intimacy between hand, eye, and weight. Someone knew how to think in stone at a scale most of us no longer do. Someone could look at a mass heavy enough to crush a village and imagine not simply moving it, but teaching it to belong. Now back to Egypt, where the Osirian at Abydos lies low and enigmatic. Great granite blocks set with a stern calm that feels older than the dynasties that later gathered around it. Water in the channels. Stone darkened with age. Interior masses too severe to flatter the tourist imagination. The surfaces, in places, suggest cutting precision that revives the old question of tools, abrasives, methods. Egyptian stonework, more broadly, has always been a field where admiration and discomfort sit side by side. We know the civilization was capable of extraordinary organization and labor, yet sometimes the finished work presses beyond what our simplified reconstructions emotionally prepare us for. This is especially true when one compares sites across continents. That may be coincidence born of shared human problem-solving. Or it may hint at the deeper thing our whole night has been circling. That techniques and geometrical habits once traveled farther and lasted longer than our fragmented records admit. Not every anomaly is real, of course. Some are exaggerations. Some are misunderstandings. Some are artifacts of bad dating, sensational retelling, or wishful pattern-making. The past attracts projection the way old glass attracts fingerprints. We must be gentle but clear about that. Yet it is equally unwise to turn caution into a reflex that smothers every genuine puzzle before it has drawn a second breath. The old maps belong in that category of puzzles, especially the ones that seem to remember coastlines no official age should have known. The Peru race map has drawn endless fascination because of claims that it preserves ancient source material, depicting South America with remarkable accuracy, and perhaps even a version of Antarctica free of ice. Some of the grandest claims remain debated, and some are likely overstated. But once again, the emotional effect matters. The map sits at the edge of acceptable history, like a man smiling faintly because he knows something he will not explain all at once. Imagine the admiral bent over inherited charts in a room smelling of ink, leather, sea salt, and old paper. His fingers move over coastlines copied from older coastlines, copied from older coastlines. He notes sources, combines fragments, U2V510s, preserves what he can, even if later claims about ice-free Antarctica outrun the evidence. The basic fact remains beautiful. Knowledge can survive in copies long after the original world that produced it is gone. And that is precisely the theme we keep meeting. Survival through transmission. Not everything survives whole. A city drowns, but a map remains. A school burns, but a number persists. A civilization collapses, but a ratio is built into a temple. A machine corrodes in salt water, but enough of it remains to embarrass the easy story of steady progress. The number 7 rises here like a bell tone. 7 worlds, 7 ages, 7 heavens, 7 root races, 7 civilizations across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Hebrew tradition, Greece, India, later esoteric systems, Native American cycles. The recurrence is almost theatrical in its insistence. One should always be careful with symbolic numbers. Human cultures love them. They are portable, memorable, and capable of attracting meaning like iron draws filings. Yet sometimes symbolism persists because it is attached to some older structure of thought that will not die. In the framework we have been moving through tonight, 7 becomes more than sacred decoration. It becomes a possible memory of repetition itself. Not one civilization rising from a blank beginning, but a series. Earlier phases of humanity or culture, each reaching a certain threshold, each meeting catastrophe, each leaving fragments. Some traditions make these worlds spiritual, others material, others both. Theosophical teachings later turned this into the language of root races and long evolutionary cycles. One can accept or reject those formulations, but one should notice how neatly they echo older patterns. Previous ages, previous humanities, previous destructions, future transitions. The Hopi speak of worlds before this one. So do other Native American traditions. Hindu texts speak of vast cycles and declining ages. Classical writers preserve memories of golden ages and losses. Esoteric schools claim to keep antediluvian wisdom in symbolic form. Egyptian temple texts speak of reconstructions based on plans preserved from an earlier sacred time. The mystery schools of the ancient Mediterranean, the Hermetic tradition, later Rosicrucian and Masonic inheritances, all carry some version of the same fragrant rumor that ancient knowledge did not vanish all at once, but was hidden, encoded, rationed out to the morally and intellectually prepared. This is where the tone of the story must remain soft and honest. We do not need to pretend that every hidden library claim is true, or that every lodge preserved literal Atlantean engineering manuals beside the ceremonial aprons. Human beings are excellent at attaching prestige to antiquity, but neither should we ignore the remarkable persistence of the preservation motif. Again and again, cultures imagine that wisdom survives catastrophe by becoming selective. It goes underground. It enters temples, symbols, proportion, initiation rites, sacred crafts. It is no longer public infrastructure. It becomes guarded ember. I rather love that image, not because it flatters secret societies, but because it matches how fragile real knowledge often is. A civilization collapses and one physician survives with a handful of remedies. A few builders preserve an angle, a load distribution, an acoustic trick. A priesthood remembers the stars well enough to rebuild a calendar. A family line keeps a craft method alive through apprenticeship. In a few centuries, it looks like magic, because the ordinary world around it has forgotten the steps. And yet, when enough anomalies gather, the bigger possibility returns. What if some of the ancient stories are remembering not just lost craft lineages, but whole civilizational plateaus now mostly erased? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis enters here with a cold, clear force. Around 12,900 years ago, something happened. Ice core shifts, platinum spikes, spherules, charcoal, sudden cooling, extinctions, rapid environmental instability. Debate continues over mechanisms and degrees, but the broad outline is severe enough. A world changed abruptly. If complex societies had developed along the then exposed coasts and river valleys of the late glacial world, much of their material footprint would now lie drowned, burned, buried, or smashed thin by millennia of rising sea, sediment, and forgetting. This is why our current civilization may indeed feel like the seventh to some traditions. Not because an accountant in prehistory kept a perfect global ledger of all former cultures, but because the memory of repetition survived. Catastrophe, rebuilding, recovered fragments, another flowering, another danger, another reset. There is a grim tenderness in that idea. We are not uniquely doomed. We are participating in an old rhythm, but we are also not uniquely innocent. Earlier cycles, if the traditions are to be believed, failed not only through bad luck from heaven, but through imbalance, technology without wisdom, power without reverence, social decay, arrogance, disconnection from natural law. One hears the same warning in different languages. Atlantean ubris, Kali Yuga decline, the corruption of earlier worlds, the misuse of divine gifts, the fall before the flood. However mythologized, the moral architecture is consistent. And here, the story turns toward us. Because the most unsettling part of the seventh civilization hypothesis is not the claim that 6 others came before. It is the suggestion that we are old enough now to begin resembling the dangerous phase of the pattern. Exponential knowledge growth, artificial minds, genetic manipulation, environmental destabilization, global communication without global wisdom. The old traditions would say, carefully now. You have seen this slope before, though you have forgotten that you have seen it. The candles in our imagined room are very low now. The smell is faintly sweet, faintly smoky. Outside, the river breathes under the night. On the shelf sit the kings, the flood, the stars, the artifacts, the teacher beings, the drowned cities, the hidden schools. None of them solve the mystery cleanly. Together they do something more interesting. They make the old linear story wobble. Maybe Sumer was not the first city world, only the first one to recover enough of the older archive to become visible again. Maybe the seventh civilization is not a boast, but a warning. Maybe our own age, so proud of its acceleration, is simply the latest flowering in a garden that has already bloomed and burned several times before. And maybe the truest inheritance of all is this quiet choice that returns in every cycle. To build only outward, or to build inward as well. To multiply power, or to deepen wisdom. To leave behind only debris, or something that can teach the next survivors how not to repeat us. You can feel the answer settling. I think, not as certainty, but as a mood, a stillness. The past is older than our confidence. The future is watching us through the eyes of the dead. And the fragments we have handled tonight, the clay lists, drowned walls, stellar numbers, bronzes, impossible stones, all seem to murmur the same soft thing. Remember more carefully, because if there is to be an eighth civilization one day, I would rather it inherit a lamp still burning than another ruin full of questions. The strangest thing is that the story does not feel old when it reaches us. It should. By all ordinary measures, it should sit very far away, in the same cold cabinet where people keep flood legends, sacred kings, vanished builders, and the patient mathematics of priests who watched the sky until their eyes watered. Yet the thread keeps pulling forward. It slips through the drowned shelves of time and emerges in our own rooms, under our own electric light, beside our own quiet machines. And suddenly the question is no longer whether 6 worlds rose before us, or whether the Sumerians inherited more than they invented. The question becomes gentler and more unsettling. What kind of world are we becoming now? Imagine a modern city before dawn. Tower windows still lit. Roads shining faintly after rain. Server rooms humming in sealed cold chambers. Satellites sliding overhead with no sound at all. Somewhere a laboratory freezer clicks. Somewhere a screen glows blue on a sleepless face. Somewhere an engineer adjusts a code string that may one day alter medicine, memory, labor, war, or the shape of family itself. The air smells nothing like old Mesopotamia. No clay, no reed marsh, no lampblack. Yet the mood is not entirely different. It is still a civilization hurrying ahead of its own reflection. Ancient traditions, when they speak of the end phases of a cycle, do not usually describe one dramatic moment at first. They describe acceleration. They describe forgetting, disguised as progress. They describe a people growing brilliant in the hands and unsteady in the heart. That pattern appears in many forms. In some texts, it is moral decline. In others, it is spiritual dimming. In others, it becomes the misuse of divine or inherited power. And in some traditions, especially those that preserve memories of earlier destroyed worlds, the warning is almost painfully simple. Technology grows faster than wisdom. That line could sound preachy if spoken too sharply. So let us lower our voice and look at it the way one studies frost forming on a window, and gradually, without anger. Our knowledge now expands with a speed that earlier centuries would have mistaken for sorcery. Information doubles at a rate that would have made ancient scribes laugh first and then grow quiet. Artificial intelligence writes, predicts, imitates, calculates, and speaks with a fluency once reserved for living minds. Genetic tools can edit the code of life itself. Networks link continents in an instant. We hold more recorded data in a pocket than whole empires once held in libraries. It is dazzling, also exhausting, also dangerous in precisely the way the old stories would have predicted. You know that feeling when a machine becomes so useful you stop asking what it might be making of you in return. That is one of the emotional signatures of a turning age. Convenience becomes atmosphere. Power becomes habit. And habit is the softest cloak arrogance has ever worn. The old myths of advanced, lost civilizations often include a fatal confidence. Atlantis, in later retellings and esoteric elaborations, becomes the great warning of mastery without humility. Its people manipulate energies, command matter, extend influence, build beyond the ordinary limits of human ambition. And then they fail, not because power itself is evil, but because power magnifies whatever already lives inside the user. Wisdom, compassion, patience, or vanity, hunger, rivalry. Amplification is never neutral for long. Modern life has its own Atlantean tone at times, not because crystal aircraft hover over the sea, but because we increasingly possess tools whose consequences are larger than our moral reflexes. We can alter climate without meaning to. We can shape genomes before agreeing on what should never be touched. We can generate convincing illusions at scale. We can automate judgment. We can place whole populations inside informational weather systems where truth itself grows slippery. We can do all this while still telling ourselves we are only improving efficiency. If you were standing here with me, beside the fire, in this dim room, I think we would both go a little quiet at that point. Because one does not need to believe every ancient account literally to feel the warning in them. Previous worlds end when intelligence detaches from reverence. When people begin to believe that because they can manipulate a thing, they therefore understand it completely. When skill outruns self-knowledge. When memory becomes decorative instead of instructive. This may be why the mystery schools, if we read them sympathetically, placed such stress on preparation of character. The Egyptian house of life, the initiatic paths of Greece, the Pythagorean discipline of number and silence, the Hermetic insistence that the knower must also be transformed. All of these traditions suggest the same underlying principle. Knowledge is not safe in unshaped hands. Before you learn how the cosmos is measured, learn how your own desires distort measurement. Before you gain power, learn the appetite that power awakens. Modern civilization rarely speaks that way. We prefer skill first, reflection later. And later often means after the system is already running. The machine launches. The platform scales. The tool enters markets. The carbon rises. The species vanish. The social contract frays. The children grow up under a sky our grandparents quietly damaged. And only then do we begin the ethical seminar. It would be funny if it were not such an expensive joke. Ancient cyclical traditions also speak of environmental turning points, moments when the outer world begins to answer the inner disorder of a culture. Flood, fire, drought, pestilence, ice, celestial disturbance. The language varies. The principle does not. Human disorder and earthly disorder start to rhyme. That, too, feels uncomfortably familiar now. Glaciers retreat. Seas climb. Storms fatten. Forests burn in seasons that once held them safe. Heat arrives in places and intensities that would have sounded exaggerated a century ago. The planet seems less like a stage and more like a participant whose patience is not endless. Some ancient prophecies frame this as punishment, others as purification, still others as inevitable transition. I am less interested in which vocabulary one prefers than in the common intuition beneath them all, that civilizations do not fall apart only from outside blows. They also become brittle from within, morally, psychologically, spiritually, institutionally. Then when the wave comes, whether cosmic, climatic, political, or technological, there is no supple strength left to meet it. And yet, the old records do not speak only in doom. That is another reason they have survived. Pure despair is a poor archive keeper. What persists is the warning joined to an opening. The Hopi speak of another world after this one. Hindu cosmology places dark ages inside larger cycles that return toward light. Hermetic texts insist that consciousness can be refined. Egyptian initiatic systems preserve the image of rebirth through ordeal. Even the flood stories contain instructions, measurements, seeds, vessels, preserved animals, chosen archives. Catastrophe is terrible, yes, but it is almost always paired with the possibility of carrying something through. That may be the most useful thought of the whole long night. The issue is not whether change will come. Change always comes. The issue is what survives the crossing. Picture a future scholar, perhaps not even fully human in the way we mean the term now, standing in the remains of one of our cities centuries from this moment. Dust on glass, salt in foundations, data vaults corrupted, towers cracked. He or she or it opens a chamber and finds fragments of us. Not just our machines, but our intentions. What would they conclude? That we were brilliant. Almost certainly. That we were kind. The evidence there might be less uniform. That we understood consequences. That answer would depend on which layer they uncovered first. Archaeology is unfair in that way. It always catches civilizations in fragments and then asks those fragments to stand for an entire worldview. One landfill can embarrass a philosophy. One preserved campfire can make a whole people feel tender. One flood tablet can shift the emotional weather of history. We should remember that as we build our own ruins in advance. Honestly, I think this is where the story turns from mystery into responsibility. Up to now, we have been wandering through evidence, legends, numbers, sunken stones, old technologies, and preserved teachings. We have asked whether Sumer inherited a previous brilliance, whether flood traditions remember an actual catastrophe, whether submerged coasts once held cities, whether ancient astronomers knew far more than they should have. All of that matters. But the final value of such questions lies in what they do to our posture in the present. If the past is cyclical, pride becomes less attractive. If knowledge can be lost, preservation becomes urgent. If civilizations can rise suddenly on inherited fragments, then what we call originality may often be memory wearing new clothes. if environmental catastrophe has ended worlds before, then we are foolish to treat our own disruptions as background noise. If spiritual and moral failure have always accompanied technical overreach, then wisdom cannot remain an optional hobby at the edge of progress. The ancients encoded their teachings in stone, number, myth, initiation, song, and architecture because they understood a severe truth. Most knowledge does not survive disaster unless it is made meaningful enough to be loved, repeated, and protected. Facts alone are fragile. What endures is knowledge bound to ritual, beauty, fear, hope, and identity. A star chart carved into a temple lasts longer than a loose sheet in the rain. A sacred number hidden in a hymn has better odds than a note tucked in a drawer. A story about previous worlds may preserve ecological memory better than a dull agricultural report. Perhaps that is why our own civilization, for all its storage capacity, feels strangely at risk. We know how to archive. We do not always know how to sanctify. We know how to save data. We do not always know how to weave it into human depth, so it will be carried when systems fail. That gap may matter more than any satellite array. In the old traditions, the survivors are never simply the strongest. They are the prepared, the attentive, the instructed, the morally aligned, the ones who listen to warning signs, the ones who can still cooperate when fear tries to make them cruel. The righteous boat builder, the temple keeper, the initiate, the watcher, the family that remembers how to store grain, read stars, bless firewood, wrap infants, carry embers, build walls that breathe, and tell the true story of what destroyed the last age. I love that the end of a cycle in ancient thought is not only grand, it is domestic. It asks whether you can keep a flame alive, whether you can choose enough over excess, whether you can pass on a method instead of just a product, whether you can leave your children a pattern of sanity when the larger structure starts to shake. And maybe that is how the seventh civilization escapes becoming merely the seventh ruin. Not by outrunning every catastrophe. That seems unlikely. The earth changes. Space throws stone. Oceans rise. Systems fail. Time humbles every boast eventually, but a civilization can become more survivable, more graceful in transition, if it learns how to pair innovation with humility, memory with adaptation, science with inward formation, and scale with limits. The old phrase, wisdom versus power, is really too simple. What we need is wisdom inside power, conscience inside invention, restraint inside abundance, soul inside system. Otherwise, the cycle repeats with the dull predictability of a badly learned lesson. The fire has burned lower while we have been speaking. The room carries that pleasant scent of warm dust and old wood. Outside, somewhere beyond the dark glass, water is moving in its patient way. I imagine the cities of Sumer now not only as remote beginnings, but as a mirror held at a strange angle. Their scribes looked backward to kings before the flood. We look backward to them. Perhaps one day others will look backward to us and feel the same uneasy mixture of admiration and pity. What did they know? What did they ignore? What warnings did they receive? What did they worship? What finally undid them? What did they manage to preserve for us? That last question matters most, because the evidence, however incomplete, keeps pressing toward a difficult hope. Maybe we are not condemned to repeat the cycle in full unconsciousness. Maybe awareness itself changes the pattern. Maybe the seventh civilization has the peculiar advantage of inheriting both fragments and hindsight. We have satellite images and flood myths, climate models and temple alignments, quantum physics and old metaphysics, machine learning and ancient moral warnings. We are, in a sense, over-equipped, which means our failure, if it comes, will be all the sadder. But our success, if it comes, may be more conscious than anything achieved before. The ancients left us stones, numbers, stories, ruins, and the smell of old questions. We owe the future something warmer. Not just data, not just monuments, a wiser way of being powerful. And if that sounds too solemn for the end of a night story, let me soften it with this. Civilization, for all its frightening scale, still comes down to very small gestures, repeated faithfully. Someone deciding not to lie for gain. Someone teaching a child how to read a sky. Someone building a tool meant to heal rather than dominate. Someone preserving a language, a seed, a craft, a kindness. Someone remembering that all systems are finally held up by character. That is how worlds survive longer than they otherwise would. The seventh civilization may yet deserve its number, but only if it learns to remember before it has to rebuild. So now the long arc bends toward stillness. We have wandered through marsh cities and flood kings, through submerged coasts and giant cycles, through temple schools, star ages, strange mechanisms, impossible stone, hidden teachings, and the soft persistent rumor that humanity has risen before, fallen before, and risen again with soot on its face and memory in its hands. The story could end in fear. Many do. But fear is not especially useful at the edge of sleep. Better to end in clarity, in a kind of quiet tenderness toward the fragile, stubborn creature that keeps rebuilding worlds. Imagine the earth from far above, not as a political map, not as a puzzle of borders and flags, but as a breathing sphere of weather, water, cloud, mountain, desert, reef, forest, city light, and darkness. Ages pass over it like slow shadows. Ice advances. Ice retreats. Rivers change their minds. Coasts drown. Forests climb and vanish. Meteors arrive without asking permission. Volcanoes alter skies. Through it all, human beings appear and reappear, lighting small fires, naming stars, burying their dead, teaching their children, making tools, making music, making errors large enough to become geology. That is one of the more humbling thoughts, is it not? That a species can become geological. Ancient traditions understood this in the language they had. Fire worlds, ice worlds, flood worlds, previous suns, dark ages, root races, ages of gold and iron. They were telling the truth as rhythm before science could tell it as process. Science now supplies impacts, ice core transitions, bottlenecks, extinctions, sea level rise, tectonics, orbital cycles, climate systems. Myth supplied memory when data could not yet be graphed. The two are not always enemies. Sometimes they are the left and right hands of remembrance. If you hold that gently, many old conflicts soften. The flood does not need to be either childish fantasy or literal wooden journalism. It can be cultural memory of real catastrophe refined through sacred storytelling. The antediluvian kings do not need to be either foolish exaggeration or immortal bureaucrats with impossible calendars. They may encode immense periods, dynastic continuity, or inherited astronomical systems rendered in symbolic reign lengths. The mystery schools do not need to be perfect secret vaults of lost superscience to matter. They matter because they recognize that knowledge, to endure, must be wrapped in discipline, meaning, and moral demand. And Sumer, poor, baffling, beautiful Sumer, remains what it has been for us all night. A threshold. Not the beginning of everything, perhaps, but the first place in surviving record where earlier brilliance reappears in a form we can still read. Their cities rise from marsh and mud, already thinking in administration, astronomy, number, medicine, and sacred order. Their texts look backward even while they invent forward. They are new and old at the same time. That double quality is what keeps the mystery alive. I like to picture one of their scribes late in the evening, when the workshop has gone quiet and the lamps throw a soft orange shimmer over drying tablets. He has copied a king list, perhaps, or an omen sequence, or a hymn, or a measurement text. His wrist aches. His stylus has worn smooth. Outside, someone is singing faintly by the water. He pauses before setting the tablet aside and looks at what he has preserved. Does he feel he is writing for his own age, or for strangers far ahead? Does he suspect that most of what his world knows has already been lost once? Does he understand that writing itself is a raft? We like to think memory is passive, but it is not. Memory is built. It is defended. It is selected. It is given shape by what a culture fears losing most. That is why the traces of previous worlds are so uneven. Some preserve kingship. Some preserve flood. Some preserve stars. Some preserve healing. Some preserve geometry. Some preserve a warning about pride. It may be that no civilization can carry everything through catastrophe, so each one chooses, or is forced to choose, what must not disappear. What would we choose now? Would we preserve formulas first, or soil wisdom, or ethical law, or language, or stories that teach restraint, or songs that can be remembered without electricity, or methods for clean water, or seeds, or architecture that breathes with climate, or astronomy simple enough to recover a calendar after the networks go dark? Perhaps all of it if we are wise, but wisdom may begin by admitting that memory itself needs design. This is where the image of the 7 civilizations becomes almost merciful. It tells us that collapse is not the whole story. Continuity exists too. Not perfect continuity. More like embers carried in cupped hands across a windy field. Enough survives for the next dawn to begin. Enough survives for someone to build again, ask again, worship again, calculate again, love again, and make the same mistakes in slightly more elaborate clothing unless deeper learning has occurred. The older I let this thought sit, the less dramatic it feels, and the more intimate. Civilizational continuity does not live only in pyramids and codices. It also lives in smaller inheritances. A grandmother teaching how to dry herbs. A mason teaching load-bearing instinct by touch. A navigator teaching how to feel direction from stars and swell. A healer teaching which plant cools fever. A storyteller teaching children that previous worlds ended when people forgot gratitude. A philosopher teaching that number without virtue becomes cold. A monk copying a text even when his fingers ache. A carpenter leaving a hidden mark inside a beam. A scientist refusing to fake results because the future deserves clean truth. These things do not look grand while they happen, yet they are exactly how ages talk to one another. The phrase seventh civilization also carries a more personal invitation. It asks each of us, in whatever small circle of life we occupy, what kind of ancestor we are being. Not ancestor only in the biological sense. Ancestor in the civilizational sense. What are you leaving in the wall? Confusion or clarity? Vanity or method? Noise or signal? Extraction or stewardship? Panic or composure? Despair or disciplined hope? Ancient peoples stood under stars with no electric glare to dim them. We stand under a different sky now, one streaked with aircraft, satellites, and the reflected haze of our own cities. Yet the stars are still there. The old cycles still continue whether we notice or not. Earth still turns. Precession still inches onward. The moon still lifts tides with the calm indifference of a queen who has seen too many empires to flatter any of them. There is comfort in that. Also, scale. Our dramas matter deeply within the human field, but the cosmos remains serenely larger than our anxiety. That can be a healing thought before sleep. Not because it makes our choices irrelevant. Quite the opposite. It makes them cleaner. We are not required to save eternity. We are required to act well within our interval. The ancients would have understood that. Their monuments track ages, yet their wisdom so often returns to conduct. Live in right relation. Honor the order that sustains you. Do not mistake temporary power for absolute permission. Keep the sacred fire. Remember the flood. Teach the children. Watch the heavens, but do not forget the hungry. Build beautifully, but build with humility. These are not antique slogans. They are durable instructions for surviving time. Somewhere in the middle of our long night together, the story stopped being about whether every anomalous artifact can be proven or every esoteric claim can be certified beyond doubt. It became about posture, about the tone in which a civilization meets mystery. With ridicule, greed, arrogance, and appetite, or with patience, curiosity, responsibility, and care. That may be the real dividing line between a culture that becomes only rubble and one that becomes a teacher even in ruin. Let us return for a moment to the drowned places. Dwarka, under the sea. The stepped forms near Yonaguni. The lost shelves beneath rising water. Whether every interpretation is correct is less important now than the image itself. Whole districts, sleeping under waves. Stone touched by fish, where once markets rang and children ran, and someone argued about taxes, and someone else watched the stars from a rooftop. It is a very tender image, if you allow it to be. Not only loss, but continuation in another form. Memory shifted from use into question. One day our own works may live in that same mode. No longer infrastructure, only evidence. No longer home, only inquiry. That possibility need not make us bleak. It can make us precise. Build so that even your ruins teach something worthy. The room is quieter now. You can almost hear the settling of the house. A faint hush, like dust deciding where to rest. Candlelight leans over the edges of things and makes them kind. If there is a museum hush in all of this, it is the hush of realizing that history is not dead matter. It is accumulated breath. River breath in flooded valleys. Desert breath in old temple corridors. Stone breath in cold halls at dawn. Human breath over tablets. Maps. Looms. Embers. And prayer. The archive of the world is not only written, it is exhaled. I think that is why these stories soothe instead of merely frighten when they are told slowly enough. They remind us that fragility is not failure. A reed boat is fragile. A clay tablet is fragile. A memory is fragile. A child learning a star name is fragile. Yet civilizations are built out of exactly such things. Not out of permanence, but out of repeated acts of care against impermanence. So if there were 6 before us, and if we are indeed the 7th, then our task is not simply to marvel or panic. It is to become good ancestors to whatever comes after, whether it inherits our world directly or digs us up from under silt and asks in wonder what sort of people we were. Leave them more than debris. Leave them pattern. Leave them mercy. Leave them warning without bitterness. Leave them records that still tell the truth. Leave them buildings that remember the sun and rain. Leave them seeds. Leave them stories where pride is not glamorous. Leave them tools that do not poison the hand that uses them. Leave them the knowledge that worlds end. Yes, but worlds also begin again through ordinary courage. And now, because the night has grown deep and your breathing has already begun to slow, let the bigger questions drift to the edge of thought where they can soften. You do not have to solve Sumer before sleep. You do not have to judge every artifact, reconcile every chronology, or decide exactly how many civilizations have risen and fallen before dawn. Let the questions become like stars over dark water, present, real, not demanding. Picture once more the marshlands between the Tigris and Euphrates. Moonlight silver on channels, reeds moving gently, a city lamp trembling in the distance. Picture a scribe setting down his stylus. Picture flood water slowly receding from a remembered world. Picture temple stones warming under first light after a long, cold age. Picture drowned walls resting under blue-green sea. Picture a bronze gear touched after centuries by patient hands. Picture a child in some future time opening a recovered book from our age and feeling, with sudden relief, that we were not only clever, but awake. The long cycle turns. The earth remembers. The stars continue their measured work. And here, for a little while, you may rest inside that larger rhythm. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the old kings keep their numbers. Let the drowned cities sleep. Let the hidden schools close their doors for the night. Let the artifacts return to their velvet hush. Let the rivers of Sumer run softly through the dark. Let the seventh civilization, whatever it finally becomes, wait until morning. For now, there is only the slow warmth of the room, the quiet after the story, and the gentle feeling that even in a world of lost ages and unfinished mysteries, something steady remains. You are here. The fire is low. The night is kind. And somewhere beyond the last thought, history itself grows still enough to cradle sleep. Good night.